Hey scientists, it's Jessica Power, one of the science curriculum coordinators at Kansas City Public Schools. Scientists, last week, if you remember, we did an activity together that represented or modeled how different birds and their beaks are able to get food. We learned about the word adaptation. We talked about what an adaptation is it simply a structure or a behavior of a living organism that allows it to survive. Now, over time, those adaptations or structures can change to meet their needs of their environment. And I told you a story about a scientist named Charles Darwin, who in 1836 set off on a voyage, a 5-year voyage, and he became very interested in birds and the beaks of birds and how they're all different and why they're different and how different birds use their beaks for different things. So scientists, we don't have another demo to do today. But last week I told you we were going to read a book. And that book is going to go further and explain for us what it really means for different birds to have different beaks. You ready? Here we go. Scientists, we're going to read the book, The Beaks of Birds. And you can see there's all sorts of different birds on this cover page. And that those birds have all different sorts of beaks. Imagine you like to go walking with your neighbors because they know so much about nature. Both used to be teachers and they are friends of your family. Mr. and Mrs. Hernandez, you call them Mr. Pedro and Mrs. Aiko, live in an apartment building next door to yours. They have a small yard with bird feeders and have given you a book to write down things you can find in nature. They call it a field notebook. Every time you go on a walk with them, you take your field notebook with you, so you can write down things you see. They often take binoculars with them on their walks to look at the birds. Binoculars help them to see things far away and allow them to appear closer. One day, you see Mr. Pedro and Mrs. Aiko excited about something they are looking at through their binoculars. You hurry over to them and learn that they are looking at the first hummingbirds of the season. They put down their binoculars and invite you to go on a walk with them and see what other birds are out today. I think a good place to start on our walk is at the big bird feeder, suggests Mrs. Aiko. We have a challenge for you today. Can you tell what each bird eats by the shape of its beak? The shape or structure of the bird's beak bill has been formed over many, perhaps thousands of years to have a specific function or way to eat a particular food. Look at the bird on the feeder. It's called a house finch. And underneath the feeder, eating the seeds that the house finch spills, are little brown birds called house sparrows. Can you tell what their beaks have in common? What are they eating? She asks. They're eating sunflower seeds, you say. Those seeds have a hard cover. I can't eat them without cracking them with my teeth or using a nutcracker. How can those little birds eat them? Mrs. Aiko's delighted. That's exactly right. They do need something like a nutcracker. That's why their bills are big and cone-shaped. Mrs. Aiko takes out a nutcracker and demonstrates how it cracks a walnut. She shows you how the nutcracker has a place to hold the seeds. When you look closely with the binoculars at the house finch, you can see that there is a little bump on the inside of the bill where the bird can hold the seed. You draw a picture in your field notebook of the house finch's beak and the nutcracker. Mr. Pedro points out a different bird feeder. It does not have seeds, but it has some sort of liquid in it. Oh, look, he exclaims. There's another hummingbird. You look at the tiny bird. The hummingbird pokes its beak into something that looks like a tiny flower on the feeder. It's a long beak, looks like a straw, you exclaim. Is it drinking the stuff in the feeder, you ask? Mr. Pedro laughs. You've got the right idea. Its long tongue laps up, or drinks up, the nectar that is hidden deep down in the flowers. Look, there's one that's eating from the flower over there. He points to another tiny bird darting among the flowers in the garden. See how it dips its beak in? It needs a long, thin beak to get into a very small spaces, just like you can use something long and thin like a straw to drink from tiny openings in a bottle, except you don't have the right kind of tongue to lap it all the way up through the straw. You spot a bird hopping up the trunk of a tree. Every once in a while, the bird stops and pecks at the trunk, causing bits of bark to fly out from around its beak. Mrs. Aiko says, "I bet you can guess the name of this bird just by watching what it's doing." "Pecking bark?" you ask doubtfully, and then you break out with a smile. "Oh, it's a woodpecker." You look at it more carefully. It sure does have a strong-looking beak. Why is it pecking anyways? "It has to poke holes in the tree to get bugs that live there," she explains. "Sometimes it has to peck out a big hole in the wood to build a nest for its babies." "How do you think the shape of its beak helps it do that?" You look through your binoculars at the bird. Its beak looks like a nail that could be hammered into the tree, you answer. "But doesn't it get a headache?" Mr. Pedro and Mrs. Aiko look at each other and smile. "No, but that is a good question. A woodpecker's skull has a built-in cushion for its brain." Who knew? Suddenly you shout, "Oh, look! There's another bird! It just flew out of the bush and ate a fly right out of the air." "Interesting," says Mr. Pedro. "So what would you name that bird?" You think for a minute. "Insect catcher," you suggest. Mr. Pedro looks impressed and tells you the bird is a fly catcher and that it does eat insects. "Next time it flies, look at its beak," he suggests. You wait until it flies out again. "Its beak is really little," you say. "Does that make it easy for the flycatcher to snatch insects out of the air?" Mr. Pedro nods his head. Some flycatchers even have a little hook on their beak so that they can hold on to the insect better. You look at a tree nearby. "Oh, wow," you say. "Look at the funny bird coming down the tree head first." "Yes," says Mr. Pedro, "that's a nuthatch. It has a beak that's shaped just as it's prying under the bark. Can you see it?" You look as carefully as you can. The nuthatch's bill seems to be tilted upward. You can imagine it lifting up bark under its beak. Sometimes, Mr. Pedro explains, it actually puts a seed into a crack in the bark and hacks at it to get the good stuff inside. Maybe that's why we call it a nuthatch, because hack sounds kind of like hatch to the people who named the bird long ago. "Let's go to the park and see what birds are hanging around the pond," says Mrs. Aiko. At the park, you see a huge bird that's about 4 feet tall, stands very still in the pond as it looks into the water. "What is that bird?" you ask. "That's a great blue heron," responds Mrs. Aiko. "How would you describe its beak?" "It's long and pointy like a dagger or a knife." "It's waiting to spear a big fish with that long, sharp beak?" "Yay!" Mr. Pedro cheers. "You figured out that one quickly." Herons don't always spear their prey. Most of the time they catch the fish between the upper and lower beaks. But every once in a while they stab through the fish or other critter just like our ancestors who hunted. See how it just stands there looking into the pond? Suddenly, the big bird's head and neck dart into the water. The heron comes up with a fish in its beak. It flips the bird into the air and swallows it whole, head first. "Hey, look at the bird in the pond! All I see is its bottom," you exclaim. Yes, it is doing what scientists do, called dabbling. It kind of tips over in the water and scoops up anything it touches. Some ducks do that. "Look at the bill when it comes back up," says Mrs. Aiko. "The bill is broad and has a way of filtering out things it doesn't want to eat." This bird is a mallard and is found in most of North America. It eats anything its bill can reach, such as plants or even insects or worms. It even has a little tooth-like knob at the end so it can pick up insects and worms when it feeds on dry land. Mr. Pedro shows you a picture of the mallard's bill. You close up on his cell phone. You copy that picture into your field notebook. We have some pictures on our phone that we took on our trip to Florida, Arizona at the local zoo, said Mr. Pedro. You'll see some beaks that will knock your socks off. As they flip through the photos on their trip to Florida, you see a beak that excites you and yell, "Stop!" That bird is big and black and white and has a long curved bill and pink feet. That's a long beak. I bet it spears a lot of big fish, you say. Actually, it doesn't strike its prey like the heron. It eats just about anything it catches in the mud and has a completely different way of hunting. This bird is a wood stork, and it's only type of stork in North America. What do you notice about its head? It's bald. Why doesn't it have feathers on its head, you ask? Great question. The wood stork puts its open beak into the water and swishes it back and forth until something touches it. Then it snaps the beak shut in its prey. It's a good thing that the old wood stork evolved over millions of years to be bald, or else feathers on its head would get all muddy, replied Mrs. Aiko. Oh, here's a pretty bird, but its beak is weird, you say as you examine the picture closely. It looks like the lower part of the beak is longer than the top. It's a black skimmer, answers Mr. Pedro. Does that name give you a clue about how it feeds? It looks like it's flying very close to the water. Is it using its beak as a scoop? Well, sort of, replies Mrs. Aiko. As it flies over the ocean, it dips the bottom half of the beak and skims a fish or two into its bill. It looks for schools of fish that swim close to the surface. That's amazing, you say. I'd really like to see that bird close up. Now here is a picture of a bird that has an unusual beak. See how it curves? It has just about the right bill for poking around in holes in the water, grass, or mud to catch a bug or small reptile. Mrs. Aiko says, "What is it called, you ask?" "It's an ibis," replies Mr. Pedro. They come in two colors, white and a glossy dark color. And the ancient Egyptians used to worship its relative, the sacred ibis, as the god of Thoth, and even buried it with mummies. Mrs. Aiko adds, this picture of the glossary ibis is very special because we usually think of these birds as being black, but it's certain times of the year, in just the right light, you can see all the beautiful colors, what scientists call iridescent, which can be found in their feathers. Aren't these birds beautiful, scientists? It's dinner time, so you have to go home. You thank your neighbors for taking you on the bird walk. While you are heading home, you see some pigeons on the fountain and wonder what kind of bills they have and how their bills, or beaks, help them eat. You ask yourself, what do pigeons eat anyways? You write this question down in your field notebook. As you turn your street, you think about all the beaks you've seen today and how they relate to what birds eat. You don't like the thought of eating bugs or frogs like some birds. Then you think about your own mouth. You have teeth for biting and teeth for grinding. Your mouth is perfect for what you eat, and you're happy with just what you are. So, scientists, that was just a book to show you different kinds of beaks, how birds with different beaks eat their food. Now, all these beaks are different adaptations. So they're different structures that the bird has that allow them to survive and get food within their environment. Scientists, I'll see you back here next week. And next week, we're actually going to talk about something really serious. We're going to talk about the wildfires that are going on across the country and across the world and how that impacts different animals in the ecosystems they live in. Have a great day, scientists. I'll see you next week.